Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Reddit ProRevenge. I've got 5 stories for you in this one. You'll hear about how too much power in the workplace can go to someone's head and how 2 friends who became enemies resulted in a parent's divorce. I hope you stay for all the stories today and subscribe for future videos. Sometimes people in higher positions at work can go on a power trip and pick on others. This story is titled, "Complain About Me One More Time and I'll Give You Something to Complain About." When I was a sophomore in college, I got a job as a waitress at a restaurant near campus. It was a pretty small place, so servers often helped out with other tasks like dishwashing and cleaning. There were a lot of call-outs. It was a restaurant after all. And I was willing to pick up the hours because I needed the money. So within a few months, I had gotten used to doing everything. And I mean everything, seating tables, working the dish pit, running the register, and even some prep and other tasks on the line. I had gotten so good at other tasks that I was put on the schedule for other stations if there were any gaps. I busted my ever-loving butt for that place, all without ever losing my smile. After a while it began to show. The managers loved me, my CO workers loved me, and the customers loved me. It seemed like just about everyone enjoyed working with me, well, almost everyone. The kitchen manager, henceforth known as Crazy Bitch, was not my biggest fan, to put it mildly. She was nice enough at first but began to grow cold and distant as time wore on and eventually became outright hostile. She was awful to everyone but seemed to take pleasure in going above and beyond with me. A few examples of what she did to me included throwing dishes into the pit while I was washing, breaking them, then running to the manager to try to blame me, telling the front-end manager to stay in the office with me while I counted my drawer. My drawer was never off the whole time I worked there, telling new hires to watch out for me, constantly dissing me behind my back to others, which I always found out about because people liked me, forcing me to stay later than I already did to deep clean various things in the kitchen, and throwing away my time off requests when she thought no one was looking. In general, this woman did everything she could to tarnish my name and make my life unpleasant. She was the only bad thing about working at this restaurant, and at times it got so frustrating that I went home and cried. The only person she didn't whine to about me was the owner, and that's only because she was scared of him. He had 5 other locations around town, and he just went around to each one throughout the week. This will come into play later on. I've always been an introvert who shied away from confrontation, and this resulted in me keeping my mouth shut and putting up with Crazy Bitch's antics for far longer than I should have now. 10 years later I would have told her where to go from day one, but college sophomore me was shy. Besides, this was a temporary job, and I just kept reminding myself that I was going to get a degree and move on eventually. To set the scene, Crazy Bitch had been particularly nasty to me over the past week, and I was extra stressed because there were midterms, and I had really hard tests coming up. I think it was those 2 factors that led me to finally snapping at Crazy Bitch. I had just walked in for my shift and was chatting with some co-workers when Crazy Bitch walked up to me. She asked me why under the ovens weren't clean. I said I didn't know. She said that she had asked me to clean under them last night, which absolutely wasn't true because I had left 2 hours before closing the previous night. I could feel the rage building inside me. I was about to blow up. Not wanting a confrontation, I just shrugged my shoulders. "Well," Crazy Bitch said, "I wish you would do a better job of cleaning around here." Something inside me snapped. I screamed, "You fucking piece of shit!" as loud as I could. Crazy Bitch jumped about 10 feet in the air and had eyes as big as saucers when she landed. It was now dead quiet in the kitchen. You could hear a pin drop, and all eyes were on me and Crazy Bitch. I jabbed a finger into her chest and said, "If you complain about me one more time, I'll give you something to really complain about." She replied, "Well, it's true." "All right then, I quit." I flung my name tag and apron in her face, walked out of the kitchen, and walked straight out the door, never to return. The kicker was that I was scheduled to do the dish pit that evening. With me gone, Crazy Bitch would have no choice but to either pull someone off the line and screw up the whole dinner service, or do it herself. Perhaps the story would have ended there, but things were about to go from petty to pro. I got a slew of phone calls that evening from former CO workers. This was long before social media. Asking me what happened, telling me how much they would miss me, or congratulating me on finally standing up to Crazy Bitch. One phone call was from the manager asking me what happened, and I gave my side of things and apologized for quitting in such an abrupt fashion. I heard what happened the next day from my former KIO workers. It just so happened that it was the day that the owner was due to stop by and check up on things. Upon arriving and looking around, he asked where I was since I had worked almost every day for nearly a year. He was informed that I had quit, and that naturally led him to ask why. Well, Everyone told him. Crazy bitch was due to come in for her shift a little after the owner arrived. When she showed up, he was waiting for her by the time clock. He told her that under no circumstances was she to punch in. Effective immediately, she was suspended. She had 3 days to give him a written letter offering an explanation regarding her behavior toward one of the best employees he's ever had. His words, not mine, and if he didn't find it sufficient, she was barred from ever working at any location he owned again. So, Crazy Bitch went home, wrote up an explanation, I still sometimes wonder what she wrote, and brought it in the next day. The owner reviewed it and told Crazy Bitch that after a 1-week suspension without pay, she was allowed to come back and work for him as a dishwasher. I don't know what's funnier, the fact that she was demoted or the fact that she was so desperate for that job that she took him up on the offer. Crazy Bitch went from being in charge of everyone behind the kitchen doors to being a minimum wage dishwasher. It gets better. A few months later, sales were down, and in the restaurant business, it's notoriously hard to earn a profit. The owner decided to close that location next to the campus, but was kind enough to offer everyone positions at his other locations. Well, everyone except one. There's an epilogue of sorts to this story. A few years later, I was shopping at the grocery store when I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around and felt my stomach drop when I saw who it was. It was Crazy Bitch. To my surprise, she apologized for how she treated me. She said she was going through a divorce at that time and didn't handle it very well, taking it out on the people she worked with. I accepted her apology, and she gave me an awkward little hug before going on her way. So, I guess despite the awful shit she pulled toward me, she wasn't so bad after all. Sometimes great friends can become enemies, and it can end up pretty messy. This story is titled, Kid Tried to Fuck With Me So I Caused His Parents' Divorce. This story is going to sound fucked up from the title, but just to be clear, the divorce was for legitimate reasons out of my control. I just happened to help with the realization leading to it. At a private school I grew up in, I became friends with Dylan. Now, Dylan and I became great friends because we were both class clowns and had a lot of fun with it. Little did I realize, Dylan actually hated me and talked shit behind my back because he wanted to be the funniest kid in class and didn't like sharing that title. Since I don't like fighting and prefer to settle disputes with words, he had always tried to pick a fight with me, knowing I'd never fight back. My parents were disciplinary and strict and would beat the hell out of me for anything like that, so no way in hell would I be caught fighting. He would apparently mess with my head whenever I invited him to birthday sleepovers, such as doing things like hiding my stuff so I couldn't find it and breaking things. I assumed it was other friends, but it turns out it was him. But this is what truly set me off. I started getting a passion for art, almost any kind. So one day I spent 3 hours in school drawing the greatest panda ever. The shading, the colors, just overall, this drawing was perfection. I fucking love pandas, and this was my greatest accomplishment. So Dylan takes my drawing and goes, "Oh, this looks cool. I'll take it." I try to save face and act cool and fake it like I don't care and say, "Oh, whatever, I can make a new one anyway." But it was clear from my eyes that I was pissed, and he knew it. So, this fucker decides to fuck with me and says, "Then I guess you don't care if I do this," and tears up the drawing right in front of me. I spent so much time on that, and it made me love the drawing, and he killed it. Petey the Panda, I will fucking avenge you. I was ready to strike, and upon Petey's grave, I will lay a vial of Dylan's tears. A month or so later, he invited me to his house for a birthday sleepover, probably to mess with me, but I planned for revenge. For an 11-year-old, I was pissed off. Little did he realize that my dad knew about how Dylan's mom and dad were starting to fight since they were family friends. Having overheard this between my parents, I knew what my revenge would be. I waited until the coast was clear, and I decided to sneak into his parents' room and brought some lipstick that I borrowed from my cousin. I went to some of his dad's shirts in the closet, put the lipstick on my lips, and kissed the shirt collar all over. I did this to a few shirts in the back part of the closet, then I quietly snuck back into the bathroom, washed my lips off, and then snuck into bed. The next morning, nothing had happened, but apparently Dylan wanted to prank me later after lunch. Fortunately, my parents had planned on picking me up after breakfast, so I left. A month or so later, I heard my dad telling my mom about how Dylan's parents were getting divorced because Dylan's dad cheated. I was shocked that my plan actually worked. It turns out it worked, but his dad was actually cheating. When his mom saw the lipstick marks on the collar, she started looking through his email accounts and found a lot of interesting conversations in some of his secondary emails. Lastly, she caught him in the act after all of this snooping, and that naturally was the final straw. Dylan became a really quiet kid after that and would rarely talk to anyone. He turned into a loner, and teachers were having problems with him because of this. Apparently, he became known as the boy with no emotion because he'd rarely speak, laugh, cry, or anything. The divorce really took a toll on him. I've got to say I kind of hoped that his parents would have just ended up having a fight or something small, but when I started that little domino effect, well, that surprised the hell out of me. But I still avenged Petey the Panda, though. Sometimes being selfish and greedy can cost you everything. This story is titled, How I Ended Up with My Boss's Job. I was working for an advertising agency, a pretty big one, that had an unethical manager. When I started out, I had a manager who was one of the most unethical managers I've ever dealt with. He'd order his sales reps to do things that would increase his bonuses, which were based on margins. For example, say a client decided to buy product XYZ and their spend was $2,000 a month. He would want the agent to put up cheaper products, ABC, and keep the spend at $2,000, even though the client didn't agree to that. The fact is, clients generally wouldn't notice, but if they did, it could cost you your job. I was the guy who refused his demands. He would tell me to cheat the client, and I would refuse. He would get mad, but I wouldn't care. This went on for a while. Now, there's something I don't tell people very often. I live in a one-party consent state, which means as long as I'm aware a conversation is being recorded, I can record it without informing the other party. I had just upsold my largest client, making him even larger, but I didn't sell the products my boss wanted me to sell. He demanded I switch things around. I refused. I told him I sold the client XYZ, and that's what we agreed to. I'm not going to change it without the customer's permission. His exact words were, "Forget the customer. This is your largest client. I need him on ABC or I'm not going to make my number." I replied, "I'm sorry, but you and I both know ABC isn't right for this client, and that's why he didn't buy it." He then said, "You're fired. If you can't follow instructions, you're fired." After confirming he was dead serious, I said, "If you do that, I'll have your job by the end of the month." I went home. I didn't think he'd go through with it. Sure enough, the next morning, I'm locked out of all our systems. I call tech support, and I get told that I've been fired. So, who do I call? I call our regional vice president and tell him that I have several recordings that I think he should listen to. Remember, my boss ordering me to do unethical things wasn't uncommon. So, I meet up with our VP and play 6 different recordings that I'd saved, showing my manager was pushing his agents to break the law. Our VP leaned back in his chair and let out a sigh, knowing he had to fire my manager. Having a sales manager who forces his reps to break the law is just bad business. At this point, I asked for my job back. He agreed that I'd get my job back and asked me to take the rest of the week off and call him on Monday. He told me he'd talk to payroll and make sure I got paid for the rest of the week as well. For your information, he fulfilled all of his promises with me. That Monday, I come into our Monday morning meeting in which our VP was there. He informed the entire team that my boss had been fired, and why. He also mentioned that if anyone wanted to apply for the job, there was now an opening. So, I applied for it, and after 3 rounds of interviews, I got my promotion. Sure enough, I was right. I did have my boss's job by the end of the month. It was glorious the first day, walking into his office and sitting in his nice, big, comfy chair. Sometimes you have to put your body on the line to prove a point. This story is titled, Guy Speeds Out of His Driveway Every Day Without Looking. I think I may have messed him up mentally forever. Here's a small piece of background information. As a kid, I was always playing rough, and at some point, even thought about becoming a stuntman. Actually, that still sounds like an awesome career. So, my friends and I did the whole fake fighting thing, and I learned how to easily take hits and pretty nasty falls without getting hurt badly. I was one of those kids who always had cuts and bruises and no idea how I got them, nor did I care. I also have always had the superpower to cause myself a bloody nose just by picking a very specific spot. This may not sound like a superpower, but if you didn't study for a test, it was God's gift as the greatest escape plan. This story happened a couple of years ago, and it may be the worst thing I've ever done. I was 17 years old, and being Dutch, I rode my bike everywhere. I lived pretty close to my grandparents and would bike past their house on a daily basis. Their house was at a corner of a Y-shaped intersection, and there was this guy who lived on the same intersection who was the worst driver I've ever met. He would just not look when driving out of his garage and speed into the road. He had nearly hit me twice already, and every time he just cursed at me to get out of his way. Now, you have to believe me when I say this, but I'm not a vengeful person. But something about this just annoyed me so much. My grandma also loves to ride her bike around town to do groceries, and I knew I had to do something before my grandma would get hit. I asked my grandma about the man, and she told me what I already knew. The guy was a jerk, and everyone did everything wrong except for him. I told my grandma what I was planning and if she would help me. She eventually agreed, and together we made a plan to teach him a lesson he would never forget. I decided to hang out around the guy's house for a couple of weeks to take note of when he left for work every day and how fast he was going. I worked everything out to the smallest detail, no room for errors on this one. I started practicing my falls again and looked up some tutorials to prepare myself for the performance of a lifetime. One sunny Monday morning, I get up and start stretching and warming up my muscles. Today is the day. I grab my bike and ride it just around the corner of the guy's garage. I mentally prepare myself and start my bloody nose with ease, making sure to get nice and bloody in the process. Then I hear it. The garage door opens. I now have 3.7 seconds before he would be racing out of his garage. Like I said, every detail, no room for error. I start riding my bike as fast as I could and get ready for the impact, and let me tell you, it went beautifully. I was no longer sitting on my seat and had my left hand already off my handlebar to help with the impact of the car. I rolled over the hood and windshield of his car and landed in a nice rolling motion, as I taught myself all those years ago. I ended up hitting the ground on the passenger side of the car. All in all, the whole accident took less than a second, but I still remember it as if it happened in slow motion. The guy was freaking out as he thought he'd just killed a guy. If you were just looking at the amount of blood on his car, it wasn't that much, but on a white car, every drop stands out, you would agree. As I lay there next to his car, he came screaming out and asked if I was okay. Of course, I pretended I wasn't, and I took my sweet time trying to get up. It was at this point my grandma came running out of her house on cue, screaming, "My baby, you hit my grandson!" The guy didn't know what to do. He was so full of shock that I thought he might pass out. I'll give him credit, he kept his cool and knew he was in the wrong. He called an ambulance and stayed by my side. When they arrived, they checked me out. I was fine, with a couple of bruises and a small scratch on my knee from hitting the pavement. They bandaged me up and left. My grandma brought me to her car and took me home. A couple of days later, I ride my bike past the guy's house again and notice a piece of paper on one of the car's windows. It said, "For sale, call this number." I asked my grandma what happened, and word on the street is that the accident left him traumatized. Now he refuses to drive, taking public transit everywhere and selling his car. My grandma's happy that she can ride her bike without having to worry. And I'm happy that I don't have to worry for her life. We talked about it afterward, and both of us agree that, although what we did was a horrible thing to do to someone, it had to be done before someone would actually get hurt. We don't feel any remorse about it. This story is titled, "Should Have Just Paid the Rent." This is a story about my parents around 7 or 8 years ago when I was barely leaving elementary school. I was really young, and my parents kept my sister and me in the dark at the time, but they later told me the gist of what happened. First things first, my parents owned 2 houses. They decided to keep the old house when they bought a new one so they could rent it out. The old house was in a decent area but on the edge of the not-so-good part of the city, so it attracted a lot of the wrong crowd. When my parents put it up for rent, after the horror story of the first tenant who used a dumb loophole in our state to live there for 6 months rent-free, my parents found a single woman with temporary foster kids who was interested. Let's call her Bad Tenant, by the way. She seemed really nice at first, housing kids who needed a home and selling homemade tacos from her taco cart. My parents did a background check and saw that her income from the state for the kids should cover the rent and figured her side hustle would help out. Everything was signed, and she moved in with her kids immediately. Now, the wrongdoing Bad Tenant had decided to take in a lot more kids, given that her house was larger than the previous one. I have nothing against these kids, as they're just victims, but they tore that house to shreds. I remember countless times going with my dad to the house and handing him tools while he fixed a variety of broken things, especially the toilets and the general plumbing. Eventually, my dad had enough and told her that all the maintenance he was doing was, 1, not required. Since the house was in perfect condition when she moved in, we planned on moving back after my sister finished high school, so we replaced anything we thought would break and repainted it, and 2, caused by way too many kids in the house. This pissed off Bad Tenant, and she stopped paying her rent. Just some backstory, my dad is a fair, reasonable guy, and I've never seen him give attitude to anyone, let alone yell. My mother, however, is your typical Hispanic mother who doesn't take nonsense from anyone. That being said, When my mom took me with her to pick up the rent, where bad tenant said some nasty things to my mom, she kind of lost it. The screaming match was awful, but there was no physical contact on either end. It ended with bad tenant basically stating that she wasn't going to pay a cent until my dad came back and continued doing all the maintenance he was doing prior. Bad tenant was dead serious about this, and my parents had to take her to court. I later learned that she only did this to stay at the house a little longer without having to pay rent. My parents were pissed. This was the second time a tenant had gotten away without paying rent. At this point, I need to say that I truly love my dad, but my mom is the most dedicated person I know. If she wants something, she'll find some way to get it. She was born and raised in Central America, traveled all the way to the US, went to school, learned English on her own, supported her brothers, and worked all the time. That being said, my mom was not going to let this woman take advantage of us. The first thing she did was head to child services with photos of the house's condition, courtesy of my father, who always took photos of the house when he went over for maintenance. They looked it over and thanked my mom profusely for the evidence, and told her that they would look into it. Next, my parents got a lawyer who collected all the photos we took before she moved in to prove the house's condition before she moved in. Now, I wasn't in the courtroom, but from what my dad told me, it was just the most satisfying thing he's ever seen. Bad tenant's lawyer was a huge joke and was obviously the cheapest and most inexperienced lawyer around. Bad tenant and her lawyer basically tried lying for every point they made, whereas my dad and his lawyer simply pulled out a photo or message, completely destroying their argument. Eventually, bad tenant was contradicting herself, and the judge ruled in my parents' favor. Now my parents knew that they were not going to see a dime from the lady, given that she could no longer house the kids. Whoops! It also turns out that she was using her mother's name to house even more kids, which explains why they were given to her in the first place. So she was going to answer for that too. Double whoops! Lastly, just to put the cherry on the cake, my parents put a lien on her taco cart, so she couldn't make money that way either. Triple whoops! This might not be enough for the subreddit, but you need to understand that my parents are hardworking people who made something out of themselves when given nothing. Terrible people shouldn't take advantage of hardworking people. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed these stories today. Also, if you aren't subscribed, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. See you guys in the next one.